Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our first tips and tricks of 2025. We took a little break in December, but we're back. Hopefully, we'll stay on the every 2 week schedule. Today's topic is R82 dynamic layers and content. R82 was released about a month ago. Guys, Steve, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. It's not the recommended version yet, but it is out there. So there's some good capabilities of this that Steve is going to show us. Steve is a presenter from Maryland. I'm sorry, Steve Grimes. Steve, what do you have for us today?
Well, we got a new feature, as you said, in R82. Originally, I've seen it referred to as dynamic layer, and then in the actual API description, it's dynamic content. And so this is a whole different approach to being able to set objects and rules in a dynamic layer. So this is, you have all of the constructs over in the management API around rule bases, layers, rules, objects. This is a situation where they've created the ability in Gaia API to make requests directly to a gateway rather than a manager. And when that request is made, then all of the usual metadata that's kept by the gateway is changed for the target target layer. So we circulated internally a lot of discussion looking for use cases, and we came up with, we think that automation teams would really like this capability. Those teams would know and understand the requests and responses that were necessary. They have the ability to deal with the data constructs that we're going to take a look at. The other use cases we came up with would be an emergency change that's limited to maybe only a gateway or two if you had a large population, or, and we don't ever want this to be the case, if the management server, the management instance isn't available. So those are the places where we thought this might be useful. So first, we have this layer that has a special property set on it. It's dynamic, which means it can be changed by these requests. And the components in the requests you're going to make are objects that you're describing in the JSON or in the command line. Then you can reference objects in the manager also, which might be a good practice. And then you're describing rules, again, directly to the gateway. This is a roadmap item. The capabilities, they're very nice set of developers that offered a lot of information about this capability and its roadmap. There are a very useful set of objects that are available right now. There'll be more objects in the next iteration of this. There are groups available. The thing to remember about the current capability is that when you want to verify what's in that layer that you set, you've got to do either a show layer request, you've got a management audit log that shows what you've done, but what you've actually set doesn't appear in the layer depiction back in Smart Console. So that Smart Console capability is a roadmap item. It's a future item. And so, I started to wonder, what would the workflow look like for this sort of thing? We'll get to that in a couple of minutes.
Sorry, Steve, let me jump in here. I forgot to mention the Q&A. A little out of practice from our break. So yeah, please, if you have any questions during this, please use the Q&A chat and we'll make sure we answer those during the webinar. Sorry,
Yeah,
Steve.
yeah, please. I'd be really interested in any questions.
Yeah.
So I put together a table. By the way, there's a document that matches all this information that spells all of this out. But some important differences is that, of course, this has got to be designated as a dynamic layer. You're making the request directly to the gateway, obviously. The specificity around rules and objects is not there. You're actually setting everything within that layer. You're replacing it every time. It's not as though you can alter an object that you created or a rule that you created in a previous request. You're just doing a wholesale replacement. Of course, we talked about the fact that you don't really see any of this in Smart Console if you look at the layer. And then you've got this difference in permission. It's, you've got to have admin permissions here to make these requests. So that's going to change. So let's take a look at the workflow. You've got to create the layer, and that can be done either in Smart Console or literally in Management API as an inline or an ordered layer. And it's got to be, of course, you got to tick the dynamic layer checkbox, install policy. And it's interesting that when you make a request after you've actually created the layer, that you get back, if you haven't deposited, any rules or objects in it, you get this JSON at the bottom of the page. There's kind of a no reply here. So that's layer creation. Now, if you have a workflow that includes review of rules before they're actually set into place in production, you're going to have to create the rules, and you want to make sure that you've got something that can either, somehow help you with a command line or give you correct JSON. So I think a lot of customers are going to be using IDEs that can enforce, syntax for what they're putting together, so no mistakes are made. And again, you're creating objects, referenced objects, and rules, and you've got to review those as either JSON or write some logic to output the usual matrix that we're used to looking at in Smart Console. So then you've got to actually implement the layer. There's this set dynamic content request that's included in the newest version of Gaia API. We'll show this in a minute. You're going to receive in reply a task ID. I'm working on it. We're working on it. We're setting the layer. It actually automatically installs policy and performs some of their actions and sends the log record back to the management server, that sort of thing. So then if there's a failure with any of that, the logic shows an error that's related to the smallest element in the JSON that you're sending. As an example, if you're sending an element that has a name in it, it'll just say, name does not exist because some mistake occurred, like a space was used inside of the labels in name, key value pairs. So that's why in the previous step, we've got to have applications that actually know about this and make sure that we get our requests correct. So that's the general outline for so the composition of this. And an example workflow. What I've done this morning is kind of fired off requests. So I've got some fresh information for us to look at here. And it's fairly straightforward, whether you're using an automation tool or a language, or if you've got command lines that you've tested for this. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, this is stuff we've seen before in the management API. It's the constructs are the same. You log in, you get a session ID that's used in subsequent headers. When you set a dynamic layer, you'll get a task ID back. If you're successful, here's a task ID, we're working on it. If you go show that task, it'll give you information on the status of that, right? There are phases that it has to execute. And it'll give you the in progress or finalized sort of status that's down here. And then when you show the layer, as you would expect, the layer is displayed, you would hope, exactly in the same way that you'd made in the request. So that's the verification that generally organizations are looking for in their change process, which is very useful. So that's just a look at an example of all of this happening. So that's what I have here. Do we have any questions in the queue?
Yeah, we got a couple popping in here, so please again, throw your questions in the Q&A and get those answers. Dynamic layer targets gateways, then how manage, let me try that again. Dynamic layer targets gateways, then how will the management server and the gateways sync? Or, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading this question. Or we have
Yeah.
to make smart changes on the management server, same changes on the management server.
Yeah, so that sync doesn't occur. I was not in Kansas anymore. You know, you can show dynamic layer. It shows the layer as you've set it on the gateway. Go back to the management server and show that layer, and it's as you set it when you originally established the layer. So that's one of those roadmap items. We're all used to that world where, the management server knows everything about the rule base. But in this iteration of this feature, it doesn't.
Okay. Will these rules persist across different admin operations? For example, reboot on the gateway or a full policy install?
Yeah, this is actually, an implementation, a set policy for an access layer. So, it persists. It's there. The metadata has been written that is understood by these gateways, and they, retain it in the same way as though you'd set that access layer from the manager.
Anything else? Let me check over here. I think you answered this. My team's using it now. How's it compared to the management API?
Well, the management API has quite a lot of other constructs. If you look in the most recent version, you've got constructs around rule bases, access layers, and then individual elements like objects and rules. So we're kind of missing specificity here, right? You're setting and replacing, the entire layer, and over in the management API, you've got, more granularity for the current time. So that might be part of that roadmap picture from us. I'd be interested to know from anybody that's here, if they're using this, how they're using it. It would be really interesting because, with the internal discussions, we're just trying to come up with good ideas, but it would be so useful to hear how people are using this.
Yeah, absolutely. You can get back to us directly, people, or talk to your account team and the information will filter up. But yeah, please reach back and let us know how you're using this also. Got another question here for you, Steve. Does Dynamic Layer have the functionality to send notifications to admins based upon block policies in the access layer? For example, if there's an excessive amount of attempts from a blocked IP, could the Dynamic Layer trigger an action to send a notification to the admins?
I'd have to look into that. I'm only speculating when I say that if a policy's been in place, that all of the features that surround it would be in place. But I'd have to look into that to confirm it. I don't want to speak out of school.
Harrington, I will jot that down and we will get back to you on that
And
one. Okay.
hey, I would also say that's a great use case for play blocks, which is a automated response-based environment that triggers not only notifications, but also responds with actions in response to a trigger. That's actually a very classic example, Harrington, of where we might use play blocks. So that's a different checkpoint product than what we're talking about here today. But again, great use case for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. Yep, that new voice, yeah, Michael Ibarra, another SU is joining on here. So thank you, Michael. Great idea.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's see, got another question here. Is there a way to indicate the presence of objects and rules in a dynamic layer in a rule base on the management server, i.e. active dynamic layer?
Yeah, that's not in the current version. It's not in
Okay.
the current. Yeah, again, I would, if you look at what happens, you create a layer, in my case, an ordered layer, because it was easy to deal with. You've got a deny rule in it, right? You set that layer, it's established in the gateway. If you set dynamic layer and create rules and objects, and you go back to Smart Console and refresh that access layer that is the dynamic layer, it still just shows the deny rule.
That covered it for questions. Anybody else have one? Please type away. That'll share some new information here. So thank you, Steve. Great info. We'll have our next, I'm sorry, we'll, oh, there's a tough one. We will send a follow-up email with any reference content and recording link of this session. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks. You'll see that invitation soon. I have to make a shameless plug for CPX. Our user conference is coming up next week. Steve, I'm gonna share real quick.
Nope, sorry.
Nope, you're fine. So everybody, our CPX is coming up. We have 3 conferences around the world. The Americas one is the end of the month. So again, you can reach out to me directly, talk to your account team if you would like to attend. There's going to be a lot of great content and training at that event also. And let me see, did any other questions come in? Nope. All right, I think we are good. Steve, thanks again. Great info. And everyone else, thank you for joining, and we'll see you here next time. Enjoy your day. Thanks all.